Gene, it's a while since you've been in the news. Are you still stepping out in your bulletproofs? Has the fundamentalist fuss died down? Is the Westboro freak show still in town? Gene, I don't know how you stay strong with the holier-than-thou banging on and on. Still, it's people like you who help me to grasp that God isn't owned by any old jackass. Hey, Gene. Gene, you cross my mind when I hear news of the government's killing people like me and you. When a layman says on a radio station that Christian homophobia stops the rise of Islam. Did you hear about the guy that got stopped in Uganda? The last thing he saw was the claw of a hammer. Do you understand why the newspapers allege these attitudes are imports from the U.S.? Hey, Gene.
It's a really powerful film, and whatever your interest in Christianity or spirituality, but it's a very powerful message that we have about your life and the position that you're in. Is there one lesson that you think that you've learned?
Well, I actually think the film is about how lethargic, traditional, heavily encumbered institution can change, and in a fairly short period of time. To my way of thinking, the church is the hero of this film. At least a church that listens to the Holy Spirit as it moves in the society and in the church. And the only thing that breaks my heart is that how sad it is for the secular culture to be leading in this and not the church. After all, we should be the ones exemplifying that kind of openness. And but I happen to believe that God will have God's way, and if the church won't cooperate, well, so be it. God will have God's way with the liberation of all people anyway. And as usual, the church will come limping along, bringing up the rear. But on the other hand, what the Episcopal Church has done, there was a bishop who, in the debate over the consent to my election, the Bishop of Wyoming, said that it had not been since the civil rights movement of the 60s for African Americans had he seen the church risk its life for something. And I guess I just want to say to you here in England, the Episcopal Church has risked its life for something, for us. And many other denominations, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Lutherans, have been watching very closely to see if this would ruin us. And indeed, we have pressed onward to try to be the church that we feel God is calling us to be. And I'm very, very proud to be a part of the Episcopal Church, and just would challenge the Church of England to, shall we say, rethink just a bit. Here's what I've learned about being in England, is that it's really time that you preach what you're practicing. Not the other way around. I mean, there are countless gay and lesbian priests in the Church of England, many of them partnered. Bishops will often go and have dinner at the home of their partnered priests, and then will say, but if this becomes public, I'm your worst nightmare. Now that is a chilling atmosphere in which to do ministry. And what is it? Is it the Victorian era when, everyone was preaching one morality and doing another? Is it a holdover from that? I don't know. You have to tell me. But it seems to me that you're much further along than you will admit. And so if we could only get bishops and the church in general to actually preach what it's already practicing, we would make a great leap forward. At least in the Anglican Church, it really does matter who is at the top. You may argue with the way that is set up, but it really does matter. I said this morning on the Today program, no one knows what it's like to sit in the Archbishop's seat. So I would be the last to second guess him. But it seems to me that he has tried to manage this situation rather than lead. And, my prayer is that that you will get a leader. And I believe in the Anglican Communion. I mean, it was all supposed to come crashing down around our ears when I was elected and consecrated. And then it was going to be at the next meeting of the Anglican Consultative Council. And then it was going to be at the, it's always in the future. But here we are 9 years later, and the Anglican Communion is holding together. And so I think, I would hope that the next Archbishop would trust that the church will get through this like it's gotten through a lot of things. And I think what we all hope for is someone who will actually lead. Moses didn't try to manage his way out of Israel, out of Egypt. He actually led, and the people followed. The church has it right in the sense that relationships really matter. And whether it be relationships between friends or relationships of a long-term nature. And I speak differently to gay audiences than I do to straight audiences. It's a different message. I have a kind of a foot in both doors, and I do believe that when you are oppressed, you're so busy fighting off the oppressor that it's hard to turn the critical eye in on yourself. And I think as the LGBT community, we need always to be doing that, doing our own work in terms of who we are and how we're living out our lives. Absolutely. So we made a critical decision about how people would get to see the film, which is that it will not have a theatrical release. But in fact, if you go to the website, lovefreeordiemovie.com, you can just order a DVD. Say that you want to show it in your living room or in your church basement or at your LGBT support group or wherever. You'll be sent the DVD and some materials that will perhaps spark discussion. And we're asking that each person who sees the film picks one person that they need to have this discussion with. Your Aunt Betty, who loves you beyond belief, but when she goes in the voting booth, will vote against us. And you need to call Aunt Betty and say, Aunt Betty, I would love to take you to lunch, because there's something you and I have needed to talk about for a long time, and I'd like to do this. If each person who saw this film did that, it would change the world. Because I think you heard me say in the prayer at the inauguration that tolerance isn't enough. Now, I suppose you can say tolerance beats intolerance by a mile, but at the end of the day, it's not much. I have a friend who says the only thing one should have to tolerate is hemorrhoids. And it sort of feels that, when someone is sort of begrudgingly willing to accept your existence, it just doesn't feel all that great. And so what we need to do is to move beyond tolerance to an embrace and a celebration of us. And if each of you picked someone you know, a coworker or a relative, a friend, and you've sort of decided you just steer clear of this subject, I'm hoping that this movie will motivate you to have that conversation.